Good turnout, yeah. I'll bet people will. Yikes.
Hello, all. Good morning. Sorry to disturb all these cool conversations, but we'll try to get started. Sorry, this panel is running late. I guess we all are running late, and we'll probably take this panel till 11:10 or something like that, just to cover the entire 60 minutes. And thank you all for being here to the panel of Future of Mobility, and we have a great list of guests here. And I'll let Professor Parth take over and go ahead with the questions that he may have. And we have a really exciting panel ahead. Please feel free to use the Hua app, add your questions there. Feel free to upvote the questions that you like, and we'll have about 15 minutes at the end where we'll have all the questions. And have fun. Thank you.
So good morning. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for joining us today. Really excited. Oh yeah. Okay. I was slightly alarmed at how loud I sounded with the mic, but I guess I'm just going to have to live with it. But yeah, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining us. So I'll start off by a quick introduction. My name is Parth Vaishnav. I'm an assistant professor at the School for Environment and Sustainability, and I work on vehicle and building electrification. So over here, one of the things that Arpit suggested I ask the panelists is one interesting thing. So one interesting thing about themselves. Turns out I'm not very interesting, so I'm going to tell you one interesting thing in general, which is that if you go on your iPhone, if you have an iPhone, and you look at the weather app, it will tell you how much warmer today is compared to the historical average, right? Your app will tell you that. And today in Ann Arbor, it is 11 degrees centigrade, which is around 18 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the historical average. Yesterday, it was 30 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the historical average, which is 18 degrees centigrade warmer. So think about that in the context of the Paris Agreement targets of, keeping warming to 2 degrees centigrade. And keep that in mind as we talk about electrification. So with that, I'd ask the panel to introduce themselves, starting with you, Jessica.
I guess I got the microphone first, so I have to find something interesting. Nice to meet you all. Something interesting you'll see in my background, I worked at Ford Motor Company for a couple of years. Justine and I were actually colleagues. I was a little bit of an unusual animal at Ford. I live in Detroit, but commuted to Dearborn. This was the pre-COVID days. And I did so for the majority of my time at Ford, not owning a car. So I would show up to world headquarters with a bicycle. I made some noise with the building ops team. I wanted to know where the women's showers were. They took me to the basement and showed me where the janitorial staff took showers. So while I work in mobility every day and have spent some time in automotive, I'm a little bit of an unusual animal.
That is fantastic.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Justine Johnson, Chief Mobility Officer for Michigan's Office of Future Mobility and Electrification. Something that's interesting about me, and I'll say this because I'm in Michigan, I love buses. So I am someone who loves to carpool. I've noticed often that when I raise my hand for carpooling, usually I'm met with, oh, you want to ride together? And I'm often like, yes, I would. And I really enjoy buses and carpooling. And the reason why is my first mode of transportation growing up was riding on a public bus with my mom. And so there's a sense of not only nostalgia, but also community that we get when we are sharing space with each other. And we start to understand the value of humanity. We start to have empathy for each other. And that really still is true to me to this day. Whenever I can carpool or get on a public bus, I usually will raise my hand to do that.
Hi, I'm Q Johnson, and something interesting about me. I came from a military family, and I was actually accepted to U of M Dearborn before I went to the military, but my dad, all the boys have to go to the military. So when I took my test, I scored in the top 20% of the Air Force, the top 10% of the Navy, the top 20% of the Army, but I was in the top 5% in the Marines. So that's where I went, because I figured I was going to be the smartest guy there. And that's where I learned the Marines stands for muscles are required, intelligence not essential.
All right. So those were a fantastic set of facts, certainly more interesting than the downer I started with. So let's start with to what extent do you guys think of electric vehicles as a solution to the climate crisis? To what extent do you think we're putting too many eggs in that one basket? And so what other solutions should we be thinking about?
So I'll start off first with stating that I think electrification is important to this dialogue, especially when we talk about reducing greenhouse gases and specifically emissions from vehicles. About 29% of emissions nationwide come from the automobile. And so we have to really look at that number and think about solutions around that. I also am someone who thinks that, we have to talk about redundancy as well. Resiliency and redundancy go hand in hand. So while we are also talking about electrification, there is room, and I'm excited in particular as we continue to advance the dialogue around hydrogen and other fueling sources that may be zero emissions and renewable energy sources. So I think we have to think about all of that. In the state of Michigan, we do have a goal of 100,000 chargers to be put in place by 2030 to support 2 million EVs on the road. And you may be saying, well, where are we now? That is a great question if someone was thinking that. And we are about 2,600. And so we have a lot of chargers that will need to be installed. But we also are having, I'd say, this one point in time in history where we're seeing a lot of investments from the federal government in particular, as it relates to charging infrastructure, as it relates to roadway infrastructure, and we're also seeing investments, especially around hydrogen. So I think, again, resiliency and redundancy do go hand in hand, and we do have to think about how we are effectively utilizing electrification as this tool that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from the auto sector, but also how do we also incorporate other clean energy sources as well.
I really appreciate her question, the way she answered that, because those are some of the things that I've been looking at for quite a long time. I don't think we could be binary. We can't say this or that. There has to be room for both because of the purpose. If you look at the vision for electric vehicles, you'll understand why it's more practical in the inner city. The vision for electric vehicles. Imagine most people drive 15,000 miles a day. Imagine your car gets 1,000 miles per charge. You only have to charge it once every night. So that means you only have to charge your car 15 times a year and drive it the whole year. So with that capacity, with that potential, that's why it's very good for that environment. But hydrogen also has its pluses for different applications. So we're going to have to get there. It's going to be multiple roads to get there to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But electric vehicle is going to be a large component of that.
I guess what I would add to that is, as an investor, we have kind of this mandate of finding companies that are going to perform, excellent in the market and bring returns to our investors. And for us, electrification is a really big part of that. We've invested in a battery company right here in Michigan. And the reasons that we liked that space are, both what Q and Justine described, but also There are other advantages. There's cost savings to an individual who uses an electric vehicle. There are strategic national benefits in terms of, energy independence. There are, many other, supply chain benefits that flow through the industry. And so, when we looked at that, electrification was very exciting to us. If you follow mobility at all, you've known that we've talked for years about this idea of connected, autonomous, shared, and electric being really important pillars of technology driving this industry forward. When we look at the space as investors, electrification is ironically the one that is starting to gain the most traction. It still has a long way to go, and I think we're going to talk about that too. But it's interesting to see those pillars evolving on different timeframes, and electrification again being one of the first. So we think it's an important part of this story, but perhaps not the whole story either.
Absolutely. And just to kind of build upon something that Justine said, as of, I think, 2014, passenger or transportation became the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US, larger than industry, larger than the power sector. And that has been the case, and the gap has continued to grow as the power sector has decarbonized. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is that 60% of those emissions in the United States come from passenger vehicles, from light-duty vehicles, but 40% come from other things, and it's not clear that electrification is the solution to all of those questions. The other point that sort of emerges from the research, and this goes back to the introductions, which is that we don't get to the depth of decarbonization that we need as quickly as we need to get to it if we simply electrify and continue driving as many vehicle miles as we do right now. So I really appreciated that this panel started with a story about not using cars and not using electrification. So the next question is that, given that electrification is an important part of the solution, what are the barriers to having it adopted widely, and what can we do to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, I can start on this one. So there was an article in the local newspaper recently. A gentleman bought an electric pickup truck. And he's been frustrated with the performance of that truck in the winter. It goes maybe 100 miles or less on a charge. And he said, we talk about range anxiety in the industry, and he said, it's like, it's my fault. He's like, the truck doesn't do what they told me it was going to do. It doesn't help me drive where I need to go every day. But this concept of range anxiety is one that's prevalent in conversations that I have every day, and I'm sure for both of you as well. And that's what led us to invest in the battery company that we did. They're using novel chemistry to extend the range of electric vehicles 300, 600 miles. That's game changing in terms of confidence of someone who might have an electric vehicle as their primary car in their home. So for us, range was a really important part of the story. Source of some of the materials going into that batteries was super important to us as well. But even still, charging infrastructure, we're probably going to beat this horse till it's dead today. Charging infrastructure is super important. Where I live today in a multifamily residential community, we don't have chargers because it is just so hard to bring the infrastructure in. So for us, those are a couple of things that I see.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And I was going to just add, as someone who does drive an EV, I can, talk about it from my personal and lived experience as well. And so, I'm going to push back a little bit, right? Because I know that we often hear the term range anxiety, and I actually don't think it's range anxiety. I think it's charger reliability. That's what we're focusing at the end of the day. For anyone who does drive a gas-powered vehicle, has your gas light ever popped up, right? And did you say, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Or did you just drive to the nearest gas station? Like, how many people just do that, right? And so I do get a light that says, you're 30%, you're 20%, you're 10%. And sometimes I've driven it all the way down to like 5 miles left, right? And so, for me, what's important is knowing that when I need a charging station, that when I get there, it's actually working. I recently was in Lansing and had a challenge where I got to the charging station. I was like, yes, we're ready to charge. And there's a term called icing where essentially non-EVs were parked in the EV charging station, in the EV charging reserved parking. And so therefore I couldn't charge my car. So then I had to do some more circles to find the charging station. So again, that's the charger reliability and the charger access. So the infrastructure was there, I couldn't get to it. And so that's where a barrier shows up. So I don't personally subscribe to range anxiety, but I do subscribe to reliability. I want to make sure it works when I get there and that I can easily park there as well. Another piece that I think is, again, the infrastructure is key to this full conversation around electrification and how do we get people to adopt to this technology. It's really about making sure, again, that these chargers are located in community, right? And so it's great when you see a charging station at a grocery store. It's great when you see it even at a coffee shop, or I've often now started eating at Taco Bell, don't judge me, but literally I'm like, I need to charge my car, and there's a charging station there's another charging station in a different city, and I park there and I walk to the Taco Bell to grab my lunch and I walk right back because that's the only thing over there to eat, right? And so when you start to think about almost this concept of mobility hubs, but how do we start to think about how charging infrastructure can be this hub that allows for you to grab something to eat, get some coffee. You think about all of those parts and pieces. Maybe you have to go to the grocery store. Maybe there's a world where a common locker is there where you're able to pick up your Amazon or whatever packages that you need. How can charging infrastructure be all of that and more? So I'd say that's a barrier. And of course, cost, right? We know that electric vehicles are still very costly. And so it's not like, we're seeing more and more, we're hearing a lot too from automakers that are looking at lower cost and more affordable EV options so that people can make those decisions. I think we'll also see as part of the used car market, as people transition from the EVs that they've been driving for the last, let's say, 7 years or so, you'll start to see those come online. And I think that will start to also address some challenges when it comes to purchasing. So I think there's a few things here in this dialogue and conversation that are barriers that do make it challenging to adopt EVs. But I would say if you've ever driven one, you probably really enjoy the experience. So, I'd say give it a try, rent one if you haven't, see what you feel about it.
It's hard to add to that. They covered it so well. Charging infrastructure is one of the biggest barriers because it causes range anxiety for people who don't have electric vehicles. They wonder where they're going to charge them. And right now, 30 to 40% of Americans live in multifamily housing, and they can't afford to put a charger right there in their building, and their building doesn't have them, so they don't have access to charging. What multifamily communities, they wouldn't even consider an EV because they don't see enough on the road. So the thought of being stranded. And then 34% of Americans, 30 to 40% of Americans live in multifamily housing communities. 69% of Americans have jobs. So finding opportunities, the stat right now is more than 70% of the people who own EVs charge at home. So how do you address that market? How would they actually consider an electric vehicle? Right now, public transportation is a really good option for them with the electric buses and stuff like that, and the rails. But if they did want to consider electric vehicles, that charging infrastructure will have to be there. Those 100,000 chargers that Michigan is planning and other places, they have to see them. They have to be noticeable, highly visible, so people can understand that there are chargers where they go, where they live, where they work, where they play.
Absolutely. Q, do you want to say a little bit about what your company is doing to aid with that transition?
Well, my company, it's like a few other companies. I have a modular charging system that charges 10 vehicles on a single circuit. It consists of one main station and 4 substations. Each station can charge 2 vehicles. It charges at level 2, and The ideal market for those are multifamily housing, workplace charging, and fleet operations, anywhere where a car sits for 2 hours or more. There's a conversation in the industry now that DC fast charging is not the best for the battery because it breaks down the battery. And there's some tests, I won't geek out on you, but the cathode and anode and electrons move between them. The material between it is a gel. And if the electrons move too fast between it, the gel starts to harden. And that's a degradation in the battery. And that will cut the battery's life by 10 to 15%. So DC fast charging is not always best for the vehicle. It's like cake, you can't have cake every day. It's really good. It's really good in a short burst when you really need it or you go a long distance. But for daily charging, level 2 is more optimal for the battery and your pocketbook. Because level 2 charging right now, if you charge your vehicle level 2 every day, 16 cents per kilowatt hour, $600 a year. Right now, if you did a mixture of level 2 and level 3 charging, you're looking at $1,000 a year, which is still good, because if you did a internal combustion engine, you could be paying between $3,000 and $5,000 a year. Most of you are still students. What would you do with that extra $2,000?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm very glad you made the point about level 2 charging actually being more affordable, because in many cases, DC fast charging sort of erases the advantage that you have compared to gasoline, because it can be really expensive.
Especially in California. In California, DC fast charging is almost, I would say sometimes in some neighborhoods, it's double what you would pay in an internal combustion engine. I remember someone was showing me that. I said, there's no way I could charge that legally.
Yeah, absolutely. We've kind of talked a little bit about what we need to make vehicles more affordable and accessible. Do you guys have a view on what policy interventions are being rolled out or could be rolled out in order to sort of ease that transition for people?
I had this thought, and I've been working with some of the people over at the DOT Joint Office. There shouldn't be any federal or state dollars spent on any new development if, the affordable, the ADA, Adults with Disabilities Act, EV should be rolled into there. Not a dime spent unless on any kind of new construction or refurbishment, unless they had some kind of planning for electric vehicles. It's part of the IRA, Justice 40 and that, but it should be in every dime spent. Every dime spent by a federal agency, federal or government agency for any kind of construction should have EVs or electrification built into that. That's just my thought.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would say, I'll talk about a few of the things that in the state of Michigan that we are doing. So there are credits available for those who are looking to purchase EVs. Many states do offer some type of tax credit when you do make this purchase. And so that's one piece that will help people who are looking to purchase. I would say, especially as we talk about the infrastructure, there is, as I mentioned before, a lot of investment on the federal side, aligning with states as they think about rolling out EV charging. So there's a program called NEVI, some of you may be familiar, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure. And really this formula funding is to allow for states to then issue an award for people who are looking to install EV charging infrastructure. So hopefully, as we continue to roll out, the state of Michigan received $110 million for this NEVI program. And so the goal is, that we'll have this rolling application over the next 5 years to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure. So I'd say that's another piece that may start to help with this adoption of electric vehicles. The other piece through a state department called EGLE, Energy, Great Lakes and Energy. Nope. Yeah, I think I might have said that right. I feel like I said too many energies. But environment, Great Lakes. I was like, I missed it either. Environment, Great Lakes and Energy. And so there's a program called Lake Michigan Circuit. So essentially, this allows for EV charging infrastructure to be installed along Lake Michigan. This is a collaboration between us and a number of different states in the Great Lakes region, so that we can see charging infrastructure every 50 miles if you're driving along Lake Michigan. It's always, I'm sure, very frustrating when you go into a different state and you're like, what happened here? It was, I had a seamless experience getting charging infrastructure, and then you get into Michigan and you might say, like, what's happening, right? And so making sure that we have a seamless effort there. And we already are starting to see organically some companies that are actually partnering with bed and breakfast locations around Lake Michigan because they see the value in providing this level 2 charging, which does allow for people to get out their car and spend a little bit more time. So there's also this ripple effect on, the economy as well, the local economy as well, as you start to see some of this. So I'd say those are a few big things that are happening. Especially when I want to mention too, so I do work in the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, and as such, we do have a program called Michigan Mobility Funding Platform. This is a program that allows for early stage companies to apply for grant funding, and again, the grant funding has to be used for projects around electrification, mobility, and it's kind of very broad. But these are different opportunities that allow for us to start to think about partnerships and collaboration that will allow for better adoption of electric vehicles and more. So I think this is there's multiple ways to approach this and multiple policies to look at, but I think we are trying our best to make sure we're being as proactive as possible. There's still a lot more to do, right? And so I would just want to say that we still have to continue to collaborate as well.
And then maybe zooming out, I'm a follow the money kind of person. It's an occupational hazard, I guess. At the federal level, we're seeing actually some interesting things happen right now to support the entrepreneurs and technology innovators building the types of things that we're going to deploy. So the SBA, for instance, has expanded its loan program to make funds available, basically matching funds to investors like myself or in private equity who are investing in certain technology sectors that are aligned with some national strategic technology priorities. So that will have the effect over time of bringing additional funds to non-dilutive funds to these questions, which hopefully will let the entrepreneurs and innovators building these technologies bring them to market better or faster. We're seeing states use policy around economic development to woo factories that are building, again, technologies just in this space very aggressively in some cases. So a couple other kind of higher level ways that we're seeing policy start to shape this landscape.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And to add a little bit of context to this, if you look at the EV penetration in the United States, about 1.5% of all vehicles in the country right now have a plug. Many of them are probably in places like California, which means that the penetration in the rest of the country is even lower. And so it's early days yet, and one of the more optimistic takes on the EV transition is that things are bound to get better. We bought an EV a couple of years ago, and we have very young kids, so we can't really go anywhere. But one of my hobbies is to plan hypothetical road trips. One of which was to go to the Upper Peninsula, and the trip planner would tell me that, well, you can go there, but you'll have to drive the last 100 miles at 40 miles an hour, or you won't really get there. And as of 3 months ago, that is no longer true. There's now a set of chargers right at the upper tip of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, which let me charge and would let me get to the Upper Peninsula without driving at 40 miles an hour. So things are getting better. One question, I think this came up a little bit in the discussion, which is that 2 out of 3 cars sold in the United States are used cars. So if you solve the cost problem for new cars, which some people say has already happened in the case of EVs, there's still the issue that most cars that are sold are old cars. And I wonder if the panel could kind of comment on that, including issues of things like battery degradation. When I'm buying an old car, how worried should people be that the battery is going to die on them in a couple of years?
I guess I'll share a story here. So while we have an infrastructure problem where I live, my mom lives in a duplex. She's my tenant. And we helped her get a new car recently, a new to her car. And we got a plug-in hybrid. And the price was pretty good. And we didn't even take advantage of some of the incentives that are out there, and we can talk about that too. But she had the experience of like driving that thing for months and realized she still hadn't put gas in the car. So even in the used car market, there are really good deals right now on electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids. Did we worry about the battery? In that case, no, the mileage was pretty low. So we told ourselves that we felt pretty comfortable. But we're seeing startups now that are building businesses to do estimates of the quality of the battery. No two drivers are going to treat the vehicle the same, so they're trying to understand battery health, create a marketplace for that. There's extended warranties that are available now that we're starting to see entrepreneurs to bring to the market to address some of those questions. So I think it's part education, but also a shift in our understanding of when we buy or lease a car, we're really like in the future buying and leasing that battery, and then the car is like just this wrapper around it. So I think there's still a lot more to come. But for us, with the low-ish mileage used plug-in hybrid, we didn't bat an eye.
Yeah, I would just second. I think a lot of the points that you raised were spot on in terms of, I think this is the role in where entrepreneurs definitely can, if anyone is an entrepreneur in the room and is thinking about where's my space, the used car market is probably another really great space to look at, especially when we think about the health of batteries. And so, at various points, you will have to assess whether the battery is, again, does it have the durability for how long you intend on using this vehicle from a used car perspective. I would say that's something that I think is going to continue to evolve. I've even seen technology, a lot of this internationally more, but swappable batteries, and people are actually looking at technology that way as well. Like, can you purchase something and actually take the battery out and swap it for a newer battery? So there may be that world or reality where solutions like that do come to bear into the U.S. market in particular. We're seeing some of this with micromobility in particular, but how will that then translate over to automobiles and trucks, et cetera? So I think there's more to come. I think it's an exciting space to be in, especially as we're going to see this wave of people who will be looking at used cars.
And again, I agree with them. It's an opportunity. Used cars is a huge opportunity because of the battery issue. Right now, if it's a high mileage, my nephew bought a high mileage Prius and the battery was no good, and he had to buy a new one which cost about $4,000, but he only bought the car for $2,000. So it's an opportunity. With the electric vehicle industry, many of us are still building the airplane while we're flying it. And some of these things we're learning as we go. And that's one of the issues that, we'll try to figure out the best way to address it. Some of the ideas that are being explored, even the federal government, there's some SBIRs out for battery recycling. And especially for the vehicles that have been on the road the longest, the Prius and the Leaf, what are they going to do with those batteries? Because you just can't junk them. Is there any way to recycle them? Or and they have that same lithium ion, and I won't geek out on you with that. So it's pretty much degraded. So how would you? But something very fascinating about the lithium ion battery. Most people may not know it, but the lithium ion battery is really like a AA battery. All of them. It's just whenever you see a pack, it's about 1,000 of those in there. So how can you recycle them or reuse them? That's an opportunity that the government and many entrepreneurs are trying to wrap their heads around.
Thank you. And so related to that, one of the things that people do worry about batteries is the environmental impact of battery production itself. In some cases, there's a greenhouse gas issue where battery manufacturing is fairly GHG intensive. It turns out it kind of pays back for itself relative to internal combustion engine vehicle in a couple of years. So that may not be the main issue, but there are issues like where are these materials coming from? There's artisanal mining in the Congo. So any thoughts on what the direction of travel is there and what solutions there are to the supply chain issue?
I'll take a stab at this. So I think, I think this particular administration has been very big on, building manufacturing in the United States. It's very big. And I think we have to continue to look at policies around manufacturing and sourcing, especially minerals that will be utilized to support electric vehicles in the future of whatever vehicle this may start to look like, with a variety of different alternative and clean energy sources. So I'd say I think we have to think about what that looks like in the United States, and understanding right now that we're not there yet. And so hence the reason why we still are looking at various places on where to source the materials for batteries still, again, is happening outside of the United States. But as I think as the technology and the science continues to evolve and policy and regulation falls in line with that, really making sure that we're sourcing materials as much as possible locally as well. So I think that helps too when you think about the full value supply chain here and making sure that we're thinking about the ethics in this process as well, because I think you're talking about ethical standards and making sure that that is true throughout this full life cycle of building vehicles. So I think there's more to come. I think it does start with the step of how do we think about doing this in the United States.
I really like what you said about the technology because that's my favorite part. That is my favorite part. There is the father of the lithium-ion battery. Many of you already know his name is John Goodenough. I love this last name because he was good enough. The guy was great. He was the father of the lithium-ion battery. And when he was doing that, I was forced to read his papers when I was at Ford, where they were thinking about electric vehicles. And the guy was brilliant. He had so much vision. And even when he stated in the different materials, he knew that the materials were going to have to be changed over time, and he knew that it was going to go to solid-state batteries. Before he died, he actually produced the solid-state battery, and they put a factory in New York and one in Australia that are producing solid-state batteries. They're not fully commercialized yet, but the sourcing and the process around them can be sustainable. He wanted to be sustainable, and he knew about the when you hear about ethical mining, cobalt and lithium come from places in the Congo, and the practices of mining it are not ethical. There are a lot of issues, social issues around that. So he knew that. So he looked at materials that could be mined elsewhere. And what she was saying was sourcing. The technology is going to improve, and when we get the solid-state battery. Now, one of the biggest things about the solid-state batteries, the potentials. Okay, NASA invented this technology where they can supercharge a battery 1,000 volts in 5 minutes. No battery right now, lithium-ion battery can take that, but eventually there will be a solid-state battery that can take it, and that I'm always looking at the potential. I'm always looking at far ahead. A lot of the people that started this industry, like Elon Musk, when he first got into his first electric vehicle, he looked ahead. John Goodenough, they looked ahead. So that's what we have to do. We have to look ahead. Well, it's like we're standing on the shoulders of giants, and we're now starting to look up.
Good. Thank you.
Maybe make it concrete with a couple examples. We mentioned cobalt. You're all in school. You have new homework. It's read the book Cobalt Red. It's shocking. And when we talk about artisanal mining, I don't know who coined that word, but there's a special place for them down there. Artisanal mining isn't like, hey, wow, small business and economic development. This is moms with babies strapped to their bodies, like hand scraping this stuff out of the earth. It is super nasty. So I think one is like starting this discussion. That's one of the reasons we invested in our battery company is they're eliminating cobalt from their supply chain. There's a whole geopolitical risk associated associated with those sources as well. So cobalt, red, read the book. We talked about lithium. I'm going to talk about aluminum, another investment that we made. So aluminum, super important in automotive and aerospace. Bauxite mining, also pretty nasty. But aluminum is one of the most recycled materials already, but it's recycled, not captured in a circular way. So we still spend a ton of energy and material input creating the different alloys that we use in different parts of cars and planes and things like that. So a company we invested in actually makes these materials circular. That changes, it reduces the energy input for recycled aluminum to 5%, versus 95% swing for primary aluminum. So if you're, again, thinking about the impacts all the way back. So again, cobalt, aluminum. And then labor, regardless of any of what we want to do domestically, we're inextricably linked to China for many of the materials that we need. And embedded in that are really challenging labor practices. So the U.S. has passed legislation around Uyghur and other indigenous groups, and it is going to be really hard for us to source the materials that we need for this industry, along with all the consumer goods and stuff that we're buying, while having that those ethical practices go all the way back to labor, even when we have policy in place. So it again, not easy, but we're seeing supply chain transparency companies and others trying to solve these problems as well. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And so I'll get to the last question before we open up to Q&A. And I think we've kind of preempted some answers to this question, which is that what is the role for technology development and entrepreneurship, which I imagine a lot of these folks are interested in. We talked about circular economy. We talked about used vehicles. What technologies are you excited about, and where you think there could be some entrepreneurship?
Well, I'm biased on this one. In the David and Goliath fight, I bet on the little guy every day. So entrepreneurs, I firmly believe, are the lifeblood of what's going to bring change. I worked at big business, and the pace of change is just really slow. So bring all ideas to the table. Even if you're not an engineer, I'm not an engineer, there's a place for you in this story. We're spending a lot of time right now looking at trucking and logistics. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of efforts to bring software to the space, to bring better utilization to trucks and efficiency. A lot of that is theoretical and sounds good on paper, but it doesn't actually play out super well. But there's some interesting companies working there right now. We just unfortunately decided not to invest in a company, but they're transforming diesel trucking, working on engines to make them run on ethanol, which is effectively zero emission and, again, a domestic fuel source in corn with a cheaper operating cost. So we're seeing powertrains, we're seeing software come in, and again, if you're not an engineer, again, like I cannot say this loudly enough, there's still a place for you in entrepreneurship in these topics.
Thank you for that. I was going to also add, and just because I just posted about this, there is something called the Inclusive Entrepreneurial Support Grant Program that just came out from Michigan Economic Development Corporation. It's $8.8 million of grant funding. The grant application is closing on the 23rd or the 24th of February. You'll see a list of criteria. It's really geared towards disadvantaged businesses and specifically small businesses. So if you look at the website, it has a list of what the criteria will look like. There's also special consideration given towards companies that are focusing on clean energy, electric vehicle charging, urban and rural transportation solutions. So there's a lot there. So just in case you are a small business or know a small business, please do take a look at that resource that's offered through the state of Michigan. I would say, a big part of our work, especially within the office, is really making sure that we're supporting entrepreneurs and early stage companies. As you can see, part of my title is Future of Mobility and Electrification, and the future part, a lot of that has to do with the entrepreneurial space. And so a few technologies that I think I'm particularly excited about include all things around hydrogen, and really thinking about the production and the distribution of hydrogen in the state of Michigan. We recently received funding through the Hydrogen Hub, so $100 million. So there is a lot. We're still very early on in this process, but this is going to require lots of partnerships as well. So there's an opportunity there. Advanced aerial mobility. How do we think about moving goods, especially as it relates to in the air? And so electrification is a big part of that. What is the infrastructure that's needed? Do we need to have vertiports? Do we need to have mobility hubs? There's so many questions. But I think there's a lot in this space around advanced air mobility as well. I would say another piece in this, and especially around freight, I think is really huge. How do we start to think about moving not only small or light duty, but also medium and heavy duty in particular? How does this full supply chain work, especially when we introduce concepts like electrification? For those of you who don't know, we do have the first electric vehicle wireless charging roadway in Corktown. And so how might this be an opportunity for those who are in the commercial trucking space to really tap into this? I don't know, but I'm excited to find out. Generative AI, how could that be utilized, especially when we talk about safety? We have a goal to really reduce and eliminate traffic fatalities on our roadways. And so how can we utilize technology as that tool to help with acknowledging and understanding distracted driving is a real thing. And unfortunately, you know, every time I look at the number, it still brings an emotional reaction out of me, because 42,000 people each year die on U.S. roadways. And so that is not something that makes me sleep well at night. So how might we start to think about technologies that actually do get to the point of addressing distracted driving? We know we are also looking at autonomous vehicles as well, but we are still, you know, most of us are all driving a car right now. So how do we make sure that we're thinking about those types of technologies and innovations that will help with addressing challenges that are on our roadways right now? So there's a lot there. There's the now, I think the now stuff that we have to work on, and then there's the near and the far. And so, you know, I think for me, I love looking at technology from a level of what can we do now to address the challenges that we have on the ground. But again, what are some of our near and long-term goals, and how are we actually utilizing technology to help us get there?
And I think I've already said it. I'm really excited about solid-state batteries, the EV charging industry. But right now, the field is wide open. There are so many different answers to this puzzle, so many different pieces. So I think that entrepreneurs, school groups, as a matter of fact, it's a school in Ireland that made and I feel pretty good about it. They made a solution very similar to mine. I was like, okay, a whole school, wow, and I'm just one guy. But that answer is going to come from so many different sources. It's just a matter of sometimes using your imagination, sometimes just driving that answer and just thinking about it, spitballing it, and that's how those answers going to come about. But it's wide open. We're building the airplane while we're flying it. There's not one, we can't be binary. There's just not one simple path to it. So that's why we're all here today.
Brilliant. So thank you very much to the panel for the Q&A and or for responding to my questions. And now I invite you guys to ask your questions.
Thank you, everyone, for submitting the questions on HUA. There are some really great questions. A lot of them are related to everything other than EVs, because we normally talk about passenger EVs a lot. So people want to know, we were also talking about public transport. We were also talking about micromobility. And Justine, all the questions that you pitched, what students can solve, basically the students have pitched the question to the panel. So they want to know, is public transport an answer to the problem that we have, that people drive a lot? And the other part also is that we also have autonomous vehicles, we have air mobility, we have micromobility. How can the infrastructure adapt to all of that? And what do we need?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, public transportation is an answer. As a matter of fact, there is a place over in Dubai, Masdar City, with all public transportation. If you go to it, look at it, and how they wrap that problem. What they've noticed that in the inner city, a lot of people really don't need cars. because they live and work within a mile of each other or within a few miles. So public transportation, Manchester City, you actually park your car outside the city and take public transportation around. So that's a big source. And then in places like downtown Detroit, where it's congestion, traffic in New York, that's where you see the micromobility with the scooters and those things are awesome. Well, the right person knows on it, but those things are awesome. It's a nice way to get around and avoid the traffic jam. So those are definitely answers.
So I appreciate this question in particular because I'm always team public transportation and shared mobility. So I do think that we have to find solutions and really to, one, invest in our public transportation. I recently moved here from Los Angeles, California in August when I started my job. And I definitely had a moment where I was driving around and I was like, where are the tolls at? There are no tolls here. And, you have to think about how do you pay for the roadways and who's riding for free and who's not. And all forms of transportation have to be subsidized because that's what they should be. But when you think about the amount that we are spending, especially when we think about making sure that our roadways continue to work and they are, they're maintained and all those other pieces, you have to think about who's going to pay for that. Right now, we have the gas tax, right? But there's a world where if everyone in this room turned around and we all drove an electric vehicle, we have to still think about our roads and how we're going to fund that. And so where are there opportunities or solutions around looking at different road user charging, if that's something that, I think a lot of states are actually exploring some of this right now, looking at electric vehicle miles traveled as a way to think about how do you transition from this reliance on the gas tax to an electric vehicle. That's one piece. But going back to shared and public transportation, I think another big part of this is how do we almost start to, I think, too, there's this behavioral or maybe there's this perception of the safety on public transportation, right? I often think it's more of a perception issue, and we all probably may have heard different stories about someone having that one situation that went bad. But I think we have to start finding ways to get more comfortable sharing space. And again, I often encourage folks, when you can, carpool with someone. It starts there. And then try to see how you transition into public transportation. We do know that public transportation, first thing I did when I moved here was got on a bus. And so I parked my car and I got on a bus and rode around for the day. And I also understood the challenges when you're waiting for a bus and it doesn't show up, right? And so I can take the bus from a very privileged point of view, but that is not the same experience for everyone else. And so making sure we're investing into our shared and public transportation options are really going to be important to this dialogue so people have a true option, right? Like it's one thing to tell somebody to get on a bus, but if you have to wait, an hour or two and the bus doesn't come or it's not reliable, then that's not really a true option for you anymore. And for some people, it is the only option because that's all they can afford. So we have to think about this balance of creating real mode choices that are reliable, that are efficient, that are affordable, that should be looking at solutions that are by land, by water, and by air. I do talk about mobility. I define mobility that way. Mobility is something that moves people, goods, and information by land, water, and air. And so I do think there's an opportunity, especially as I was talking about advanced aerial mobility, how might we start to even think about our goods? Do all of our goods need to move on a truck or in a car? Can we start to think about the pathway being the air, which is starting to move our goods from point A to point B, even on a campus setting? Think about how many goods get brought in. And so how do you start to really take that that granular view of how do you start to move things in different modes? And so I think that's going to be really important to this conversation. I can talk about this stuff all day. So I'm going to pause here, but I'm going to share the mic. My colleague.
Yeah, well, two things to add really quick. We've actually invested in a company that helps in this space. They let employers give to their employees a mobility benefit, which functions like cash on your specific mobility debit card. And you have the choice. You can use it to pay for the bus. You can take a scooter. If you're out late and you take an Uber, that's fine too. Like, that's totally up to you. So there are cool tools coming, hopefully the U.S. soon. They're in Europe today, that let us take advantage of the other options that are there. Apparently, I'm in the mood of giving assignments today, so I'm going to ask a question. How many of you all have taken public transit in your, like, where you're going to school? Okay, this is good. You're students, so we love public transit because we can't afford anything else. There are folks that didn't raise their hand, and then there are folks that we did raise our hands. You know, folks that have never taken the bus or the subway or whatever, where you live. Your second homework assignment is, regardless of which seat you were in, find the buddy in either drag someone that's never been on the bus or the subway, or if that was you, find a buddy that does that, and just try it. Because there are things like, I don't know how to pay. Which door am I supposed to get on? When I come out of the subway, like, I perpetually never get the corner of the intersection right. Like, just try it once, and I guarantee, like, something serendipitous will happen, and then you'll be like, this actually wasn't that hard. So read the book and take public transit.
I think this is wonderful. We are out of time, but thank you everyone for submitting the questions. Sorry we could not get to all of them. Let's have a round of applause. Just to keep you posted, so we have a break till 11:30. 11:30 we'll have another set of breakout panels. It will be again in two different rooms and the auditorium, so you can choose where you want to be, and have a good break.